Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for taking this precious lunchtime to join us on a very exciting side meeting on transforming education starts with teachers, how teacher policies and social dialogue can transform the teaching profession. My name is Oliver Liang. I'm from the International Labor Organization in Geneva, Switzerland. You might be asking, what is the ILO doing here? Well, together with UNESCO, we are the co-custodians of the ILO UNESCO recommendation on the status of teachers from 1966. To date, the only international instrument that actually sets out principles on working and professional conditions of teachers. This session is going to be dedicated to teachers. It is hosted by the leaders of the Action Track 3, and that is the governments of Nigeria, of Romania, together with the stakeholder International Task Force on Teachers for Education 2030, the anchor agency ILO, and UNESCO. So we're very pleased to have this exciting event today. What we want to do today is explore a little bit in depth some of the recommendations that are coming out of Action Track 3. Now, I hope some of you have had the time to look at the discussion paper that has been posted on the Knowledge Hub of the Transforming Education Summit. And I know some of you were involved in the consultations we had on that process. What we came out of that particular action track will be explained by the co-leads, but we really want to explore some of these particular issues, especially with regard to the adoption of national teacher policies. A few housekeeping remarks. We have interpretation today into 2 languages, into French and English. Unfortunately, we just learned that Spanish is not available, which is very unfortunate because we have the Vice Minister from Panama here today, but we are very agile organizations and we will figure out a way to make everyone understand each other. I would also ask if when you speak, you could speak at a conference rate, which I'm trying to do right now, which makes our colleagues, the interpreters, have an easier job because they have to, of course, bring this into different languages. Let me quickly introduce some of the panelists we will have today. We have with us from the Action Track 3, Professor Abubakar Adamu Rashid, who is Executive Secretary of the National Universities Commission of Nigeria, and he represents one of the co-lead countries. Mr. Radu Zeke, who is a counselor of the minister from Romania, the other co-lead country. We have Ms. Heike Kuhn, who is head of the Division Education at the Federal Ministry of International Cooperation from Germany. We're also honored to be joined by Ms. Agnes Makonda Ridley, who is the Cabinet Minister of Education from Malawi, one of the countries that has adopted teacher policies. We also have the Deputy Minister of Education from Ghana, Mr. John Tim Forjur. We have the Deputy Minister for Teachers and Education Personnel in the Ministry of Education, Mr. Ivan Sirahil from Indonesia. And from Panama, we are joined by the Vice Minister of Education, Mr. Jose Pio Castillero. And from Education International, which represents teacher unions around the world, we have Deputy General Secretary Ms. Haldis Holst. And from South Africa, Mr. Enoch Rabotapi, who is Chief Director for the National Institute of Curriculum and Professional Development, and who happens to also be one of the co-chairs, along with Ms. Kuhn, of the International Teacher Task Force. And finally, from UNESCO, our partner agency, Mr. Carlos Vargas, who is Chief of Section for Teacher Development here at UNESCO. May I now give the floor to Professor Rashid for just a few opening words. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to warmly welcome you all to this strategic side meeting of the TESS Action Track 3 on teachers teaching and the teaching profession. As you are aware, this meeting is being hosted by UNESCO, ILO, UNHCR, UNICEF, International Task Force, Teacher Task Force, the World Bank, as well as Romania and Nigeria, being the co-leads of this action track. On behalf of all these credible and strategic hosts, I welcome all of you here and appreciate you, particularly scholars, educationists, teachers from Germany, Ghana, Indonesia, Panama, South Africa, Romania, and Nigeria. And similarly, welcome and appreciate the education specialists and experts here present from Education International, the World Bank, the TTF, UNESCO, and ILO. We appreciate them for their peerless commitment to the cause of education in general and teacher development in particular. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the purpose of this meeting, as the moderator, Mr. Oliver has explained, is to explore the possibility of forging or strengthening a global initiative for the transformation of teaching by means of comprehensive teacher policies at national levels. In the next 1 hour or 1 hour and a half, the meeting will explore several questions, including the most obvious one: how can teacher policies and social dialogue transform the teaching profession? The answers to this and other relevant questions will help in promoting better and more harmonious working conditions for all teachers and education personnel. It is my belief and confidence that this meeting will facilitate the emergence of a more competent, confident, and motivated teachers and education workforce across the globe. I once more welcome you all to this meeting and look forward to a robust debate and discussion of the issues. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Rashid. So there you have the buzzwords for the day: national teacher policies based on social dialogue. And to help us explain a bit what these ideas are, can I call on Mr. Radu Zeke from Romania to walk us through some of these ideas. Perhaps you come up here. It seems to be the custom now.
It's the custom. I shall do it. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll try and take you through a presentation, which should go up there on the... You don't have the presentation. Okay, then I shall take you through the what was supposed to be on the presentation. Mainly on the activity of the Thematic Action Track 3. I have the slides, but they are not there.
Your written slides.
No, I'm told no. Okay, so I'll just stick to the oral presentation of Thematic Action Track 3, which was on teachers, teaching, and the teaching profession. And teachers, trainers, and other education personnel are generally considered the single most influential variable in an education system for achieving learning outcomes, quality learning outcomes. And the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goal 4 and the transformation of education will depend heavily on teachers and education personnel as the main agents of this transformation. The challenge of Action Track 3, therefore, was to seek commitments and action to create such an education workforce at global level in a manner that is achievable and sustainable. The main effort of the global consultation process that the 3 co-leads conducted over the last month, process that will continue until the final submission of the discussion paper to the United Nations Secretary General, has thus been around the need to identify successful policy interventions and good practices, provide evidence-informed recommendations for action at the country level, and provide suggestions for collective follow-up actions at global level, building on and strengthening existing initiatives, partnerships, or coalitions. Of the consultation process, I would like to underline that about 40 good practices were reviewed, and a document was proposed in 2 iterations, which was followed by 2 public, each of them was followed by a public consultation, each of these consultations involving approximately 200 participants. Apart from these consultations, there was also written input from 15 countries and organizations. There are also consultations with Education International and with representatives of 2 other thematic action tracks, namely Action Track 4 on digital learning and transformation and Action Track 5 on financing. The main idea of the paper is that there is a need recognized by everybody for teachers and education personnel that are empowered, adequately recruited, well-trained, professionally qualified, motivated, and supported within well-resourced, efficient, and effectively governed systems. Improving the status and working conditions of educational staff is paramount if the world is to make optimal use of the leadership and innovation capacity that teachers can have in their communities, where they can and should act as transformation agents for the education systems from within. Action Track 3 discussion paper calls for every country to have an empowered education force, and this entails an adequate number of qualified teachers. All teachers have quality initial training and continuous professional development throughout their careers, and the teaching personnel's leadership and innovations are recognized first of all, and then supported adequately. Accelerating progress towards SDG 4 and transforming education is only possible when all education personnel assume these roles. They are professionalized, trained, motivated, supported in all settings, including crisis and refugee contexts, and at all levels of education, from early childhood to vocational education and training to adult and higher education. We identified 3 main policy levers that can help in this direction, and that we invite you to comment on in the latter part of this event. We need strengthened national teacher and education personnel policies to include provision for professional development, collaboration and team-based work, empowering innovation and leadership, quality assurance frameworks, professional and working conditions, and diverse entry paths or diversified entry paths into the profession. A second area at policy level would be involving personnel, teaching personnel in policy making through social and policy dialogue and based on principles of freedom of associations and on the principles of collective bargaining. And finally, a third area of policy influence would be investing and ensuring that public spending covers wages, working and professional conditions, and the lifting of wage constraints on public services through strategic revenue collection. 3 more policy levers refer to strengthened, I'll move on to the global initiatives. 3 possible global initiatives. Global, regional and national coalitions of teachers and their representatives, education authorities, civil society organizations and academics can be leveraged and promoted as part of the follow-up to the Transforming Education Summit. At the heart of this is the notion that teacher voices and experience should be placed at the center of education decision-making, including in relation to responses to current and future disruptions and the transformation of education systems. At global level, international coalitions such as the International Task Force on Teachers for Education 2030 and representative bodies will work to strengthen capacity for social dialogue and development of teacher policies and must continue to ensure that teacher perspectives are part and parcel of global education movements. Further coordinations with the action track on financing is being planned to ensure commitments made on education financing can also address teacher professional and working conditions. Strategic investment coordinated at global level is a desirable initiative with regional bodies as key players to ensure that promising practices, policy innovation and national initiatives are shared across countries. Greater international regular monitoring of respect of teachers' rights must also be carried out through existing and new international bodies. I think I'll stop here, and we invite you now to explore these ideas and to support the transformation of teaching by means of participatory policy making and teacher professional development. And I look forward to an interesting discussion hereafter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Seke, for setting out those proposals by Action Track 3. Now, you've talked about the whole slew of them, but we're going to focus on 2 particular issues today. That is, national teacher policies developed through social dialogue. And the good news is that this is nothing new, particularly for UNESCO or for ILO or for anyone working in the teacher area. There has been already a lot of experience in this area. To help us understand a little bit what that experience has been, can I call now on Madame Kuhn to set out a few words about the previous experience on this area. You please stay at the podium, that's fine.
Yeah, thank you, moderator. Yeah, and it's my great pleasure now to give you the lessons learned from teacher policy development in Sub-Saharan Africa. And this will be just short. So maybe first the background. So since 2015, countries in Sub-Saharan Africa have undertaken a process to develop comprehensive teacher policies using different tools, but in particular the Teacher Policy Development Guide developed here by UNESCO and the Teacher Task Force. And the guide identifies 9 dimensions which are necessary to develop national teacher policies, but some countries added other dimensions, including teacher autonomy, social dialogue, and inclusion, though they made it fit for purpose. So I have the great pleasure to just present 7 recommendations. A bit really short. You see them on the screen, on the PowerPoint. So first, national government ownership and commitment are essential. I think this is nothing new for here in the room. You need the commitment of those who undertake something. And then, this is important, the second recommendation, led by the Ministry of Education, but with all stakeholders, including the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Labor. Why those 2 ministries? Of course, the Ministry of Finance is the one sitting on the financial resources. The Ministry of Labor is, what my previous speakers have said, is on the decent working conditions. Third recommendation, robust structures and procedures and the collaboration framework are very important. Coming to the fourth recommendation, social dialogue and involvement of teachers is key, as teachers are in the front line in policy implementation. There is a lot of substantives. Teachers go to school every day. They meet the pupils. They know best, so we have to ask them and have to be in a clear dialogue with them. This is one of the recommendations that came out. The fifth recommendation, effective dialogue is a long process, and this needs to be allowed for in planning. A dialogue is also, it starts with conversations, but education is nothing you can do in a day or in a year, so you really need the time to do this. And the ministers sitting next to me, they will speak afterwards. I think they will know best from the practice. The sixth, recommendation, development partners play a key role in the policy processes. Coordination, financial and technical support. So we can work together and should do this and bring our knowledge and our best practices together. And already the seventh recommendation is that also we have to be clear, and there's always monitoring and evaluation in every process, so costing should be done throughout and early in the process to get a sense of what you are doing and if you are on the right way. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. So we know now that countries have already had this experience of setting national teacher policies. One of the key words is social dialogue. What is social dialogue? To help us explain that, may I call on Carlos? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oliver, and thank you to all ministers and to all participants for your presence here today. Basically, as you've heard throughout, and we've been weaving this from yesterday in our side meeting on the social contract of education, which begins with teachers. We're weaving into what are the policy implications of that social contract. And one very important one, and that we have seen in the Futures of Education report, is the prominent role that teachers play, that they are called to play, and the autonomy that they need to actually participate in education policy making. So that is what our proposal is. Our proposal is for social dialogue to be active in every country. Basically, some of the principles that you can see on the screen speak of that impetus for teacher participation. So social dialogue includes information sharing, consultation, and negotiation with teachers. So it is the intensity of participation that moves from the more consultational, in which teachers are asked as to their views and their opinions, to the more deliberative approaches of social dialogue, one in which teachers are actually participants in the policy-making process, in the decision-making processes. So that is one of the features of social dialogue. We also believe, and we know by experience, and we'll hear from our panel today, that the participation of teachers in education policy making ensures the reception, the buy-in, and the knowledge of the very people that are expected to lead the educational transformation. So this is beyond the implementation of curriculum, where teachers already play a very important role, but this also has to do with putting teachers at the center, as we said, of the policy formulation. So drawing from their knowledge, the Futures of Education report again calls on a role, a renovated role of teachers as reflexive practitioners and as knowledge producers. It's this very knowledge that we need to leverage, or otherwise we risk to miss out on the perspective of those who are the closest to educational realities, to communities, to classrooms, and whose knowledge can actually inform educational policymaking. As you know, social dialogue is rooted in the enabling rights of freedom of association and collective bargaining. My colleague Oliver had already mentioned the ILO UNESCO recommendation of 1966, but there are specific conventions of the ILO, particularly Conventions 87 and 89, that call for the participation of teachers with collective bargaining, but beyond also the issue of working conditions and more into the content and into the organization of learning, again, from those who know it best. So we think that social dialogue should be institutionalized, it should be regular, so the development of frameworks for social dialogue and for policy dialogue are very important. Today, we will be hearing from such examples in different countries from the panel. And finally, to say a very important element, I would say almost a precondition for social dialogue, is actually the development of institutional arrangements that allow for this to happen. And here we're talking about national teacher councils, service commissions, teacher and employer organizations, governmental commissions that actually convene and pull together all of the stakeholders in education for their participation. Again, if we really want to believe and think of teachers as knowledge producers, as reflexive practitioners, and as policy partners, we need to prove it by including them in policy and educational decision-making processes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carlos, and thank you for mentioning the ILO important conventions number 87 and 98, which touch on freedom of association and collective bargaining. These are fundamental conventions of the ILO, which means that ILO member states, which is almost exactly the same as UNESCO, are bound by ILO membership to the principles of these conventions. That is something that perhaps the labor ministries in your countries know, but I think it's also important for education ministries to know, because this affects all workers, including, of course, teachers, but all education personnel as well. Well, thank you so much. We've now heard the theory, all the good ideas, but I think what's really exciting about this panel is to hear how this works out on the ground by the people who have the very tough job of making this happen. So I'd like to turn to the eminent panel that we have. Maybe I'll start with you, Madam Minister Ridley from Malawi. Can I ask you, you've recently adopted a national teacher policy. Can you tell us a little bit in a few minutes how that experience was, what some of the major challenges you faced were, and how you overcame those challenges? What can you advise other countries when embarking on such a mission? Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all colleagues in this room. I'll take a bit of an unorthodox way by way of responding to your question. I want to look at the topic that has brought us here. Transforming education starts with teachers. And I want to put that side by side with the fact that my country developing the comprehensive teachers policy marks the first time that we have had such a policy. And then I want to go from there to looking at what other countries maybe are in the same situation. What I want to say is that whether you're looking at sustainable development or whether we're looking at even just education, we all like to say education is about the teacher. Alongside the learner, it's about the teacher, and so on. Transforming education starts with the teacher, but does it start with the teacher? When, for the first time, we're having a policy, what does it say about what we say? Do we, as the education community and anybody else, development partners, interested in the welfare of teachers or interested in education per se, do we say what we mean and mean what we say? That's where I want to start. Because very briefly, we developed a policy, yes, but if I was to branch, so 3 messages that I wanted to highlight. Number 1, transforming education starts with teachers. Do we mean what we say, and do we say what we mean? And where I come from, we say, God above and nothing in between. Am I telling the truth when I answer? Because each one of us can only answer for ourselves based on our own experiences. And then collectively from those answers, we can see whether as a global community, we really mean what we say when we're saying the teacher is at the heart of education. Because what we do will show us whether it is. And looking then, the second message I wanted to underline as I'm going to go through is developing, deploying, and remunerating, motivating the teacher does not come cheap. And because it doesn't come cheap, as systems, as individuals responsible, we sometimes shy away from the whole task, because in almost any country, the education ministry is the biggest employer of government workers. So when you're talking of improving working conditions, improving pay, and so on, you're talking of the largest component. And usually the cost, once you start calculating, is so big that you can't do it. So you end up not doing it because we tell ourselves we do not have money. At the same time as we're doing that, there may be a major capital investment program in the Ministry of Transport where a road is needed. And that ministry needs the Ministry of Education to produce engineers. To produce engineers, you need teachers at all levels. We call them lecturers when they get up there, but they're teachers, aren't they? So at what point do we begin to look at investment, at the cost of a quality teacher as being an investment that must be seen at the same level as the capital investment in other sectors? For example, mining, which to take off needs the products of the Ministry of Education. So when do we turn investment in education? Some aspects, can we now begin to talk of capital investment into education, like producing teachers as a capital investment? I don't know if that exists in other countries. It doesn't exist in my country. So what I'm trying to say is we can develop policies, and we have. Whether those policies will see the light of day in implementation depends on some of these things I'm talking about. Will there be money to do what we've planned to do? And then the third message, so the second message to crystallize it, is that quality teachers do not come cheap. They'll only happen when we internalize the fact that we as education ministries are the biggest employers of government workers. The majority of government workers are in education. That's a big bill, just paying them to be, before we've given them the tools for the job, before we've done anything to build schools where they can teach. The environment, the working environment is about where do they go when they say, dear, I'm going to work, dear, and they go to work. Where is work? In my country, it could just as easily be under a tree. Is that what the teacher signed up for when they said, I want to become a teacher? Is that not the best way to drain their passion for the profession they love best? So investment and putting our money where our mouths are. The message continues. Are we really putting teachers at the start of transformation? Why are we still in this room talking about these things? In 1990, when the World Education Community met in Jomchan, they talked pretty much about similar things. I reviewed it this morning. And we are here today. Is it 32 years on, 1990? Those who can crack arithmetic. I wasn't so good at arithmetic. And
32.
yes. But we're talking about the same things. The what. We keep talking about the what, but maybe it's the how that we need to be looking at. What we know, but how did we do it? What is it in the how we did it that landed us here? What are the obstacles in our way of achieving what we want to achieve, what we've always known? Even in 1990 we knew. So the third message, also the second message is, let us internalize that we need serious investment into teachers, and serious investment is big money. But surely, if education is what will power countries to sustainable development, education will lift us out of poverty, education will lead to self-actualization for all our youth, then surely it's worth investing in. And we must then see it as an investment, not a cost. Number 3, social dialogue. Government, so social dialogue looks at the tripartite relationship. Employer, employees through their organizations, and government. Except in this case, government and employer are one and the same. Anybody who has been on the ground in a strike knows what tensions that brings. So while making the policies, it may be easy to be calm. When time comes to determine resources, what goes where, and if you're going to choose whether to employ more teachers because you need more, or to pay the teachers that are in the system more, and you don't have a luxury of having both, you choose either more teachers or you choose to remunerate the teachers that are in there better. But the teachers that are in there are suffering from heavy workloads. Who makes that decision? And so government or ministries of education and the social partners, the trade unions representing the teachers, are we adversaries or are we partners? The policies we have all developed depend on the nature of that relationship, but it's not an easy one. It's not an easy one. So the question is, in the middle of everything that I've said here, how do we then work to improve the working conditions in my country? We have done something, but not enough. We've done something in a corner, but not comprehensively, showing that when we say the teacher is at the heart of what we do not mean it fully if we look at our actions, because we never pay the way they ought to be paid, the teachers, because usually we say there is no money. And usually there is no money. The economy is very small. What will make it that money is there? What will make it that teachers who don't have houses, like in my country now, have houses? Because after all, the biggest motivator is you have to have somewhere to live. Decent working conditions. Without a house, how can it be decent? And how can I motivate teachers to teach in rural areas in Malawi, where most of our learners are, when there are no houses, particularly in rural areas? And every day I say to the teachers, I value you, but by God, I don't have any money to build houses because there isn't any money. So the international community, looking at that situation, how does it wrap around us as ministers of education at the core face of dealing with these seeming dilemmas? So for me, it's not whether we developed a policy, it's whether those policies will be implemented and implemented to the full at scale. Because it's not just about some teachers, it's not just about some schools, it's about all schools having quality teachers who are well cared for, who are well remunerated, but by God, it's difficult to square the circle. And I think I want to leave it at that for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Minister, for that extremely clear message. Teacher policies are, at the end of the day, pieces of paper, and how do you implement them? Maybe I can turn to Mr. Sirahil, who is Deputy Minister of Education from Indonesia. What advice can you give? Indonesia also has a teacher policy. And how are you overcoming some of the challenges that Ms. Ridley just set out? How do you actually make it happen? How do you find the resources to actually implement what's in the policy?
Thank you so much, Oliver, and good afternoon to you all. It's an honor for us here to be here to share Indonesia's experience in terms of transforming teachers, teaching, and the teaching profession. I think in our transforming education transformation, which we call Merdeka Belajar or emancipated learning, we started with the question of why, and then we continue with how. I think it's important to ask about why we're doing what we're doing as a whole, as the whole team, not only the ministry, but the whole stakeholders of education in the society, and then think about how we're doing it. And we came to the conclusion, the why, like all of us in education, are doing what we're doing is for the students. So our education transformation placed student front and center in all aspects of decisions and policies and programs that we're doing. So it's not just about student-centered learning in the classroom, but it should start from the student-centered policy and then student-centered programs, and therefore we can have a student-centered learning. So decision-making should always think about whether this is the best for the students, not only for the adults, but also, most importantly, about the students. And then there are two principles for transformation, and I think with the pandemic also, this has complicated because first is about putting students first and foremost, because they are actually the reason why we're doing what we're doing in education. And the second one is about the principle of equity. I think this has exacerbated by the pandemic, that the most vulnerable groups, the most marginalized groups in the population suffer the most. Learning crisis and the gap already was a problem before the pandemic, and it has become worse during the pandemic. And this is like the two foundations of our transformation in Indonesia. So we're thinking about, and our dream is how our schools can be an environment where first it's about the student-centered mindset of all the stakeholders, starting from the principal all the way to the teachers and also the community, and how it can be an environment that is safe, that is joyful, that is inclusive for all kinds of students to learn there, and then how the culture of the school is the culture of learning, sharing, and collaboration. How can we make that happen? And then, and last, the result should be about the student learning. Again, it's all about the students. So then the final outcome of the school transformation is about student learning outcomes. And therefore, in the Directorate General for Teachers and Education Personnel, we have like 5 pillars of transformation. The first one is transforming education leadership. We need to invest in the human resources in education, and the most important is the teachers. But then we ask ourselves, for a system that is as big as Indonesia, we have more than 3 million teachers in more than 300,000 schools spread in 17,000 islands, how can we make that happen in a way that is effective, efficient, and can reach all? A lot of experiences in the past, we tried to enlighten the teachers, inspire the teachers for new ways of teaching, but then when they come back to the school, the principals and the school supervisors don't understand what's going on, and the classroom is, they say, they're noisy, please keep them quiet, because that's, what they believe should be happening in the school, and then the transformation doesn't happen. So then we started with the school principals, with the leadership, that we want the principals to be instructional leaders. Not only they can lead schools, not only they can understand student-centered learning, they make decisions putting students first and foremost, but also they can coach the other adults, they can coach other teachers. So then they become like the enabler for professional learning community in their school. And the most important part in our learning training program here is not about the skill, it's about the mindset. So in the training, we start with changing yourself, and then changing the classroom, and then changing the school and the society. At the moment, we are doing about 24,000 potential leaders in our new leadership program. And we're aiming to get to 300,000 to 400,000 new school leaders by 2024. The second part is the transforming initial teacher education, because the new teachers also need like a new kind of mindset. And here we made it clear about the teacher standard, especially the beginning teachers, because sometimes in the teacher education programs, our experience in the past, it's not clear whether we want the new teachers to be like the most perfect teachers that they can be, and it's impossible. Just like in medical profession, like new doctors cannot be expected to do brain surgery after they graduate from the medical school. It doesn't happen like that. So then we are thinking about how to stage the development of teachers, including their teacher learning. So by transforming this, the curriculum in the initial teacher education, we also have like clearer expectation, what is the beginning teachers needs to know and be able to do. And then more like practice-based curriculum and involving more practitioners in teacher education, because here is to reduce the gap between the academic and also the reality of teaching practice. And the third one is we have 514 local governments in Indonesia that have autonomy and their own budget and make decisions about their how to run the education system. And then we think about teacher learning cannot also be standardized. Teacher learning needs also to be differentiated, just like students learning. So therefore, we created like 34 centers of excellence, which are our provinces in Indonesia, and the goal is to provide like a rich environment and relevant learning experiences for our teachers, so they can also respond to the variety of student learning needs, which might be different. We cannot have like one great idea and then all teachers in the country should learn about that, because what they need maybe is different according to their situation and the context that they have to respond to. And the fourth is the pillar is about the principle of what we call gotong royong. Gotong royong is our local wisdom, which means that supporting and helping each other. And there's more to this. It's not just about supporting and helping each other in terms of collaboration, but there is a sense of social empathy and social responsibility in terms of transforming education and also transforming teachers and teaching. We believe that government doesn't know or doesn't always know everything and that cannot do everything. So we need like all stakeholders to be inspired and to be involved in the movement, so then we can transform this together. Like just the saying, it takes a village to educate a child, because it's not just in the school, but it's also the whole aspects of the society. So we have, for instance, one of our programs, we have placed like $25 million equivalent to 140 teacher organizations to be involved in using like innovative ideas for foundational skills like literacy, numeracy, and character. And the fifth is, of course, transforming teacher management. I think this is one of like the most difficult aspects in our transformation. For instance, we have the situation where 43% of the teachers in our government schools are contract teachers whose salary and also working conditions is still not very well. So we want to transform this. We have just launched the program to process the recruitment for more than 1 million teachers to fill in this, the contract teachers, so they can be the civil servant and they can have a better working conditions in terms of salary and also their professional development. And last but not least, I'd like to also mention about one of the experiment that we're doing in Indonesia with the new curriculum that we just launched. We believe that learning happens when there is more intrinsic motivation. So when teachers choose to participate in the learning program, when schools choose to participate with new progressive ideas, I think just like what we believe in learners, it can also happen with our teachers and our schools. Our new curriculum is not mandatory. It's still like the prototype stage, and we provide like options for our schools. If they choose to participate, then they can start learning from the platform. So we couple with the technology about implementation of this new curriculum. And the way that we do the training is not from the top down, but it's more like the community empowerment. so we move away from the cascading top-down system, and again, like especially like the context like Indonesia, which is very diverse. So we empower school learning communities. So we have like 143,000 schools who have chosen, volunteered to participate and to implement this new curriculum, and meaning there will be like 143,000 school learning communities that are going to be involved. It's about 1.4 million teachers to be involved in learning like new ideas in terms of the new curriculum. So, and this is one of, I think, one of the promising and also exciting, but also quite anxious for us to see how the professional learning community can prove its worth in terms of transforming an education ecosystem. What we hope is by leveraging technology, teachers can not only learn about the teaching methodology, they can also improve their skills, but also they can share with each other through the technology, because we believe that technology cannot replace the humans, but technology can help us accelerate what we hope. So with that, I'd like also to share I think to share from, learn from each other. I think it's always good with this Transforming Education Summit. It's an opportunity for all countries, and we'd love to share with other countries and learn from other countries about how to transform the education system. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ivan. At first, I thought you weren't going to answer my question, but you actually did very thoroughly, because I think what was so interesting is you set out all these strategies of how to implement a teacher policy that don't necessarily require massive amounts of funding. It's about creating collaborative communities, about investing in leadership. And I think you're reminding us that this is a long process. This is not something that you just simply take some money and you throw it in and the problem is solved. It is a very long and evolutionary process, and it's really fascinating to hear, and I would encourage people to contact you for further information. I want to turn to the Deputy Minister from Ghana, if I may, Mr. Forjur. You've heard a little bit about the challenges of getting a teacher policy. I know Ghana has adopted one recently as well. You've heard of some of the strategies that Indonesia has done. What's been your experience in adopting a teacher policy, and what advice can you give to countries that want to go down that path so they can learn from your experiences? Over to you. And unfortunately, we have to be a bit mindful of time. I know that I'm a terrible moderator, so I'm punishing the latecomers on this conversation, but we would like to also hear from the audience a bit, so if we can keep it perhaps under 5 minutes, that would be great.
Thank you very much, Your Excellencies, colleagues and friends. It's exciting listening to very insightful submissions from my colleagues who are doing amazing things in their countries, transforming teaching and learning, and cases that are very similar to what we are doing in Ghana. We all agree that to transform education, teachers play a key role, and that in Ghana, very instrumental to our education transformation agenda is the teacher policy. So we have indeed developed the comprehensive national teacher policy, and this was developed with the involvement and participation of all stakeholders. As a matter of record, we modeled it after the 9 dimensions provided for in the UNESCO teacher policy guidelines, and we also added some 2 additional dimensions, inclusion and social dialogue. With great support from Norwegian Teacher Initiative and UNESCO, we were able to have this process successfully done. This process has addressed some very critical challenges that we had in our education system. One of it had been the issue of teacher continuous professional development, and that framework has been developed and addressed, and funding allocated to ensure that is implemented. Subsequent to that, we've had some specific incentives that were introduced some annual incentives that were introduced for teacher professional development allowance to aid teachers to be able to, on their own, also develop themselves with partnership with other agencies. Some very holistic approaches have also been designed and developed with teachers at all pre-tertiary levels also having a clear pathway. With a very comprehensive, harmonized teacher policy, other challenges that also had to do with teacher deployment have been addressed, and the design and framework came out as a result of this policy. We still have a very huge challenge with teacher rationalization, which is being addressed with this policy. And just like my colleague minister really indicated, you have a country where people to train teacher ratio is within the global benchmark, very acceptable levels. However, you still find a good number of schools in hard-to-reach areas and in deprived areas that are without teachers. Even in inner cities, in big cities, you find the inner city schools having very inadequate levels of teachers. One of such problems had been the digital divide, had been teacher accommodation, and some other socio-economic factors which are very peculiar nation to nation, and these are being addressed. Teachers were heavily involved in the process of this policy. At the idea generation level, we engaged thoroughly teachers. At the district level, at the regional levels, and the national levels, teacher unions were all heavily involved. We have 4 major teacher unions that are recognized and were involved in the process right from the beginning. Ghana has over 800,000 public sector workers, and out of that, 350,000 of them are teachers. Therefore, this policy was quite an important one for the government, and in ensuring that we motivate teachers. In an era where digital literacy is front and center of our transformation agenda, the policy also addressed training to do with teachers having the enhanced digital literacy levels, both pre-service and in-service, to ensure that they will be able to become the coaches and inspirational mentors who will be on the side and guiding our learners with the collaboration, with creativity, with innovation, and to be able to help them bring out the best in them that will build skills in them that meets the dictates of our 4th industrial revolution. We went further beyond ensuring that there's inclusion in the curriculum for presets. We also ensured that for teachers that are in service, each one had a laptop, one teacher, one laptop policy, which was a major investment the government put into teachers to ensure that they have the right levels of digital literacy to be able to transfer same skills to our learners. So very rigorous engagement were done with various stakeholders, including teachers, teacher unions, and stakeholders from the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it's really interesting to hear how much you also relied on social dialogue to develop these this national teacher policy, which covers so many aspects of teaching. And I think it'll be really interesting to hear in a few years what kind of successes you've had, so that you can also report on that. That would be really fascinating, I think, for the community. Let me now turn to another region, Panama, where you have, of course, also a teacher policy, and I believe it's been there for a while. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've learned through that experience, and perhaps also let us know, because I know you have very strong unions there, how you've been able to engage with representatives of teachers to work on this policy. Mr. Deputy Minister, please go ahead.
Muy buenas tardes. Placer compartir con ustedes la tarde de hoy y agradezco a la UNESCO por la oportunidad de poder compartir experiencias de los distintos países que lo conforman y escuchar las experiencias de cada uno en un tema que se ha discutido siempre. Esperemos que un día de mañana ya no discutamos estos temas, sino que estemos todos casi alineados. Las políticas públicas en educación son una forma de materialización de las relaciones entre el Estado y la sociedad, un campo heterogéneo constituido. Perdón, Carlos.
Gracias, Ministro. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we don't have a Spanish translation, so I will be very happy to translate and to synthesize what the minister says. So just first of all, he's very grateful for this opportunity to share the contributions and the experience of Panama. I think the vice minister has expressed the wish for these conversations to be over as we overcome the problems with teachers and the teaching profession. Ministro, por favor.
Son producto y deben ser producto de amplios consensos nacionales. Por ello es necesario resaltar el carácter público de la política, la intervención de actores diferentes al gubernamental.
So the Vice Minister is emphasizing the issue of public policy, stressing that it is public. And as such, it is a consensus, it is a national consensus of the direction that teacher policies should take.
En ese sentido, Panamá ha llevado a la práctica exactamente el cambio o la definición de políticas públicas docentes a través de la consulta con los distintos sectores, fundamentalmente, entiéndase, docentes, directores de centros educativos, padres de familia y los propios estudiantes. Pero en ese avatar de lucha exactamente para lograr una educación de calidad, que es la que todos reclamamos, nos encontramos con algunos inconvenientes.
The policy, as it is public policy for teachers, it is one that is elaborated in consultation with different stakeholders, including teachers, teacher leaders, principals and directors, but also parents and other stakeholders.
Uno de los temas fundamentales es el de la educación continua. Tenemos una deficiencia, hay que reconocerlo, en este tema, porque no tenemos un modelo de gestión, de servicio, de recursos y tecnología bajo un esquema de financiamiento sostenible y capaz de atender a los docentes en todo el territorio nacional y fundamentalmente el de las áreas más apartadas y las áreas comarcales.
So one of the key strategies for in the struggle for quality education is actually the professional development, the continuous professional development of teachers. As there are efforts, but there's a model that's lacking for the management and the sustained financing, including for technology, for teacher training.
Por otro lado, hay que reconocer también que tenemos un sistema, un Ministerio de Educación centralista, en el cual el director del centro educativo presenta las necesidades a una instancia, las direcciones regionales de educación, y a su vez a la planta central del Ministerio de Educación, que es donde están los ministros y los viceministros, lo que genera inconvenientes en la definición de temas importantes para el desarrollo del proceso de enseñanza.
One other obstacle has to do with the central nature of the education system, where there is a central Ministry of Education that receives the inputs from the regional directorates, and in turn the regional directorates from school leaders as to what are some of the needs that are specific to different areas. So that is one of the obstacles in terms of the central system.
Otra falencia que tiene el sistema panameño es exactamente que no cuenta con una carrera docente que establezca los derechos, obligaciones, deberes del personal docente, la relación que debe existir en el ejercicio de su función y su vinculación, indudablemente, con la razón de su funcionamiento, que es enseñar a la población estudiantil.
Yet another obstacle has to do with teacher careers. So the lack of a career that articulates, on the one hand, the rights, the responsibilities, but also the function of teachers is one that is missing. Particularly a career model that would favor the outreach of teachers to their communities and ultimately to learners.
Pero una de las ventajas que tenemos aquí a la pregunta referida a qué vinculación tenemos con las organizaciones docentes, nuestro país tiene alrededor de 18 organizaciones gremiales de docentes y el Ministerio de Educación tiene exactamente una mesa bilateral con ellos donde periódicamente nos reunimos y discutimos los temas fundamentalmente relacionados con sus derechos, sus obligaciones, las políticas que vamos a implementar y se intercambian experiencias, talleres, exactamente para lograr establecer fehacientemente cuáles son las políticas que diseña el Ministerio de Educación, precisamente para lograr capacitaciones, tema de guías de sexualidad y apoyo socioemocional, además de la atención de las reivindicaciones a solicitud de los docentes.
One of the elements and the mechanisms for consultation and participation of teachers is the bilateral table or conference that has been implemented by the Ministry of Education, where all 18 teacher organizations are able to participate on a consultative basis by means of workshops as well to define the education policy, and that particularly concerning teachers. A couple of examples concern, for example, the introduction of comprehensive sexuality education or social and emotional learning as part of teacher development.
En 1916-17, el Ministerio de Educación de Panamá estableció un diálogo nacional con la participación de docentes, padres de familia, estudiantes y la comunidad en general. Eso produjo una ley, la Ley 59 de 1 de noviembre del 18, que creó lo que se denomina Consejo Permanente Multisectorial para la implementación del Compromiso Nacional por la Educación, sus siglas COPEME, y convirtió ese compromiso, como les acabo de indicar, en una ley. Así, nuestra sociedad trazó una ruta común con el objetivo de que el país cuente con un sistema educativo que garantice y promueva el ejercicio efectivo del derecho a una educación de calidad y con equidad para todos los panameños y panameñas.
Ministro, 1918 es la fecha.
El decreto, la ley es de 18, pero la discusión fue 16-17.
De 1918,
sí,
no de 2018.
No.
Muy bien. Just for clarification.
Perdón, 2018.
2018. So just for clarification, the minister is speaking about a process that began in 2016 and 2017, where a national dialogue was undertaken with teachers, with parents, with learners, and different organizations. This process ended up in the adoption of law number 59, which included not only the participation of different stakeholders, but actually the commitments to inscribe into law their ambition for quality and equitable education, including teachers.
Entonces los retos son importantes y muchos para lograr efectivamente la implementación de las políticas públicas. una efectiva articulación con los docentes para que estén bien capacitados en la implementación de políticas. Por otro lado, mejor condición laboral para los docentes, sobre todo de los docentes de áreas de difícil acceso y las áreas comarcales. Muchas gracias.
I guess everybody understood that one. So just to say, the minister finalized by saying that some of the challenges for implementation, of course, have to do with linking with the communities for implementation, including by improving working conditions for teachers and to continue their professionalization. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, señor, y muchas gracias, Carlos. Thank you very much. That was fascinating to hear how Panama has done that, and as also how you've engaged throughout with stakeholders, including teachers. So now we come to teachers, actual real teachers. Haldis, can I turn to you? You've heard now some very fascinating national experiences about developing teacher policies, and many of the speakers have alluded to social dialogue. I think Minister Ridley talked about teachers as being essential partners in the process. Now, we know that maybe teacher unions and ministries are kind of like a married couple. They can't escape each other. They need each other, but sometimes they also fight. So that's all part of the process. What advice would you give to governments on how to strengthen social dialogue in these processes? And can I ask you also, what advice would you give your member unions on how to strengthen and improve social dialogue? Thank you.
Oh, there were big questions. Thank you, Oliver. At the end of a very long session, I'm very glad that people are still here. First of all, I will say, don't take this the wrong way. Don't conduct dialogue the way we're doing it here. Because it's not supposed to be that the ministry invites and sort of speaks to the teachers or the unions for an hour and said, hey, that's great, go home, now we have consulted. Reflect what the word dialogue means. And the word dialogue in this context is about equal partners meeting. Now, I know that we aren't equal in all respects because we have different responsibilities, different mandates. But Carlos put up there when he defined what social dialogue was that there are 3 levels. There's a level of information, there's a level of consultation, and there's a level of negotiation. When you meet for negotiation, you actually meet as equal partners. And for a negotiation to work, there has been a consultation process. And consultation is not information. Consultation involves the art of listening and reflecting and seriously considering, maybe I should change my opinion. Information is about letting the other partner understand where you are and where you come from. And I was so glad when I was introduced at the beginning today, I was introduced as an expert. And that's how I think you should consider teachers and their representatives. They are the experts on the ground in the real life where it's happening out there. So now I'm going to start coming to some advice. We've had great stories here, and I think all the stories have learning points. None of them can be transferred directly to another country. And this goes back to something I said yesterday too. Here, as everywhere else, one size does not fit all. You have to build your own system. But don't think you can do it just at national level. And I think we have several indications here why that won't work. First of all, your teachers don't sit in the ministries. They are out in the classroom. They are out in the local communities. Social dialogue needs to be established at every level where decisions are made. That means that it needs to be alive at the schools, very often in the local municipalities, in regions, and at national levels. What you deal with where depends on your country. because you have different responsibilities that have been delegated to different levels in different parts of the country. But lesson one, don't think you can only do it nationally. And then I look at the title of this event, Transforming Education Starts with Teachers. This, my friend, implies, when you read the next sentence, how teacher policies and social dialogue can transform the teaching profession, you need to see those two sentences in context. You cannot transform the profession from the outside. You were told here that, I think it was from Indonesia, that professional development, this is intrinsic. You know, it's about being motivated and wanting it yourself. So you have to start the transformation with the teachers, talking to the teachers, consulting the teachers, bargaining with the teachers, finding out what they need. Then you develop your policies. Then you use social dialogue again to implement it. Otherwise, it will not be transformation, but it will be what some people have joked about, reforms that only exist on paper, and business goes on as usual. Transformation happens when you implement, and you implement with someone. That's when you create change. I was so lucky. I'm Norwegian, a teacher. When I started working, they were in the process of implementing a reform. And they made many mistakes of trying to reform things. So they did something new. They decided to put a lot of time, resources into implementation. And they did that by not only training the school leaders, but also the school union reps. And we were trained together, and we were given, I became union rep the first year I taught, we were given collectively the responsibility of implementing a reform. And I think it was has been one of the most successful reforms we've ever had in the Norwegian education system, because we did it bottom up, all levels. And we used a well-developed social dialogue system. So you need to have something that can exist over time, that isn't just created for this transformation, but can survive it. That must develop in your own system. And remember, every social dialogue is easy as long as you agree. It's the moment you disagree that you must know how you are going to deal with that disagreement. That's why, in my country, we actually have a collective agreement that regulates social dialogue. So we have the traffic rule book before we start our discussions. That's one way of doing it. There are other ways. And I know I keep talking, you know, I can talk forever on this. But one more thing that I really want to highlight is how you perceive social dialogue. In Carlos' PowerPoint earlier, you probably don't remember, but there was one point there that had two terms, social dialogue and policy dialogue. In some countries, they tend to, and I know social dialogue is not the term everyone uses, but you tend to think of industrial issues when you think of social dialogue. That is about working conditions, pay, and you know what directly impacts your working conditions. While policy dialogue is often perceived as something else that gives you the right to discuss education reforms, to discuss policies before they are made. So I would recommend that you see social dialogue as a broad concept that includes policies, because we're here talking about teacher policies. So in some countries, those would be defined outside a social dialogue. And also be aware of that in all countries, employers are not ministries. So that if you only use the social dialogue and the employer is not the education ministry, then there's a disconnect between who has responsibility for what. So same size does not fit all. Ask yourself what the purpose is. And if this seems, like many have said, you know, you take time, and yes, it costs money, it's also very efficient, my friends, because it's a representative system. You don't have to consult every teacher because the unions, they offer the structure to make sure that they're all consulted. So it's actually quite efficient. But it's also democratic because it assures that the teachers here trust the people that they are representing them because they have chosen them. And so they are not picked by the employer or the minister, they are chosen by themselves. And that freedom of association is core for social dialogue to work, because otherwise you're not meeting as equals.
Thank you very much, and indeed, thank you. Thanks for reminding us that social dialogue is indeed a broad concept. In the ILO, it refers to dialogue about anything that affects working conditions. And if you think about education, everything from digitalization to curriculum to how schools are organized affects the professional and working conditions of teachers. So social dialogue in that respect indeed is very broad. Thanks also for reminding us that social dialogue creates co-responsibility. I think that's a really interesting concept because it creates, as Minister Ridley was saying, partnership and responsibility also, of course, is a way of ensuring that everyone really brings something to the table. So that's an important concept as well. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a few minutes before we wrap up, but I would like to take advantage of the big field of knowledge that's out here in the audience. We have a fascinating panel here. I'm sure there are a few questions that have come up in your mind. I see a few hands already. That's great. I think you can use the microphones in front of you to speak. If you can quickly identify yourself, please, and keep the question to the point, that would be much appreciated. I'll start with this gentleman over here.
Yes, my name is Gerard Vries. I'm from the Ministry of Education, Arts and Culture in Namibia, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director, Lifelong Learning, Arts and Culture. Now, in our context, what I've heard today is the very traditionalist view of a teacher. The one that went to a teacher training college, a university, eventually got qualified multiple times, and is now a master teacher and then continues on. But there is now a major opportunity with this transforming education momentum to widen the scope of what is a teacher or what is an educator. That's a very raging debate in SADC, because if we go this route of transforming education, where you will have multiple IT services all over the show, the person that's the IT specialist will probably now become the highest paid teacher in the fray, because that person will have typically different qualifications, but not a teaching qualification. The tour guide that knows the topic top to bottom has a huge body of knowledge, but doesn't have a teacher qualification. It's a teacher. The arts extension officer that teaches kids how to weld and make sculptures and make welded items is a teacher. So it is now the opportune time to pick up the conversation. Will we remain with a traditionalist view of what constitutes a teacher, or will we embed it with a view to going to September in New York? Okay. Where we then have to redefine how the teacher of the future will look like if we really, really want to reach and achieve the sustainable development goals that are off track, by the way.
Thank you very much. That's a very important question. And I think we'll gather one or two more, and then I'll turn it over to the panel. We have also people listening online, so I will turn to a person there. We have Madame Senora Concha, is that from Chile, I believe, is online. Can you hear us, and can she speak online, or can she ask her question? Can we hear her? No, we don't seem to have that facility, or does someone have the... As I said, it's a very agile learning process here. Ah, yes, okay. Señora, por favor, su pregunta.
Perdón, señora Concha, no le escuchamos. Ahora sí. Adelante, por favor.
¿Ahora sí? Perfecto. En Chile nuestro sistema se construye sobre la idea de evaluaciones estandarizadas que ponen mucha presión sobre el sistema. En este escenario, ¿cómo organismos internacionales y la experiencia internacional puede ayudarnos a evolucionar de una idea de evaluación estandarizada a una que ponga al centro la dimensión más formativa y que no genere más agobio del que ya produce el difícil escenario en que estamos?
Muchas gracias, señora Concha. Just a quick translation for the panel. What she's asking is how we can find alternatives for standard testing, which puts a lot of pressure on teachers, and how can we move into more formative forms of assessment, one that feed into the developmental process of teachers. Muchas gracias. And I believe we have a couple of more hands, and I'm asking my colleagues in the translation booths if we can stay for another 5 minutes so that we can wrap up. Let us begin here. We have our colleague from UNHCR.
Thank you very much. My name is Mahmoud Houré. I work with the UNHCR, and I wanted to highlight the particular for refugee children and teachers. Global displacement is now at 100 million. It has been the highest it has ever been. And the education situation for a lot of children who are caught in crisis and conflict remains very precarious, and it has been for a very long time. And particularly for refugee teachers who are often not included in national teacher management and development systems, they do not have a voice. They do not participate in the development of policies in social dialogue. I was wondering, what we can do together to bring them on the table, because if we don't do that, we will not achieve SDG 4, and we will not meet global commitments to education. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll take one more. I see perhaps Madame there. Go ahead.
On va faire travailler les traducteurs. I'll speak French. Monala Roussi, Madame Badialo, we're both from the Francophonie. I'm the director of IFF, and I wanted to bring my testimony and ask a question. For the last 15 years, we knew that education starts with teachers, and we've been working on the permanent training of teachers, and we offer this training in virtual and face-to-face, but also integrating the national language. In other words, we don't train teachers that speak French, but also in Sub-Saharan Africa, teachers with 44 different languages, African languages. And we explain to the teachers how to improve learning through national languages. And my proposal will be presented next. We could work all together to try to bring more value to teachers, to train teachers, and really appreciate their training and help them to train the pupils of the 21st century, not the ones for the 17th century. This is my proposal. Thank you. Merci.
To the panel very quickly, because we have a few minutes left. We had some very challenging questions. One about who is the teacher? What is the teacher of the future? We had one about standardized testing and whether that, quite frankly, stressful system cannot be changed to be a more supportive, informative kind of system. We had, of course, an important question about how we can integrate teachers in crisis. I'm going to simply be a volunteer system. Was there something, one of those questions that the panel would like, someone would like to answer very briefly? And I will call on first Ivan, and then Madame Kuhn, and then Heldis.
Thank you. I'd like to answer, or maybe respond to. First one, yeah, I think we don't know the answer, but let's do that. I think this is the momentum. I agree with you. Let's reimagine education, but also reimagine what a teacher and teaching profession can be for responding to the need of our era. I think what Indonesia has been doing is we are unbundling, for instance, the higher education, where we give like 3 semesters, the university students can learn from social projects, can go to villages, start like a startups, and counted them as university credits, because we believe to learn about collaboration, communication, critical thinking can happen best when you are in the field. So not in in the classrooms. I think these life skills can be learned in many contexts. So this is what we're trying to do. So we have to, I think one of our overall theme is to be able to respond to this, we have to take the risk, we have the courage to try new ideas. We have to have the courage to fail. It's okay, but try, because that's what we need to do. If we stay as it is now, we are not going anywhere, and we are getting away from the needs of our era. So I think the courage to innovate and the risk, taking risks for the sake of our students, again, this is like the center of our philosophy. The need of the era is not what we have known before. We are running the education system for the uncertain future, very disruptive. So what kind of education that we need to provide for our students so then they can be the human that can respond to all the needs of their era. And therefore, like the standardized assessment, we have, again, like this is something that Indonesia has done. We decided to stop the standardized assessment. So we choose like more like a survey kind of assessment, where the function of the national assessment is to provide the data. Therefore, we can strategize where the areas and schools that need most, and then provide the help, more help there. So then we can strategize this. So I think we know we need to do something, but what I think the most important part in the policy level is I mean, like for us to have, like, of course, like the will and the courage to take the risk, because our students cannot wait, the time keeps going, and we need to do something. And I think the Transforming Education Summit is such a very, very good momentum for us. Yes, we need to recover from the pandemic, but at the same time, this is a moment for us to reimagine education system, including with the teaching professions.
Thank you very much. Courage, what an important word. Heike, may I turn to you for a quick response?
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick response to the colleague from UNHCR. Reaction, you are perfectly right, 100 million refugees on the move. We need to tackle this situation. We do this from Germany, from my country, with a big donation to Education Cannot Wait. The name is the program. You are perfectly right. And I just wanted to add also, we're working on technical and vocational training. We are a big donor on this. This is also needed as we speak about the lifelong learning. And we just had the Morocco conference last week. So learning is there all the time, and we have to reflect this in refugee situation, in crisis situation. And we, for instance, in ECW now developing the new strategic plan, we're bringing this in. I just wanted to give this answer to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Heldis, did you want to add a comment? Yes.
I'd love to respond to all of them, but I can't. But I want to say to UNHCR that I think that's an excellent topic for social dialogue. because this is a question of getting the discussion going the minute people cross a border. If they're crossing a border, it can also be concerned internally displaced, but then you often already have the country structure in there. So I would say perfect topic. We know we have member organizations that both want to organize people, whether they are in camps or individuals across borders as refugees, the minute you identify that they are a teacher, but they need to be allowed to have them as members. And we need the government to very quickly have policies to acknowledge their competence so they're not seen as second-rate professionals. And I would like to say, yes, be creative in thinking where do we recruit tomorrow's teachers from, but don't throw away the core of what makes a teacher, the pedagogy, the didactics, the developmental psychology. So yes, you can recruit people with very different background, but don't dismantle us as a profession.
Thank you very much. It's been a fascinating panel. I think on the issue of national teacher policies built on social dialogue, I certainly have heard nothing but very positive support and experiences from a number of countries and regions that have gone that path. It's not always been easy, but I think from what I've heard from this room today, this is certainly something we are going to propose further from Action Track 3, and we would, of course, be welcome and grateful for any further feedback you might have on this kind of proposal. You can contact us during the summit today, or of course via the various online modalities. You can reach the Action Track 3. Now, before we close, I do want to turn to one final person who has often called upon to add some final words of wisdom from South Africa. May I ask Enoch just to sum up what he's heard today and to react, and then we'll close. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. I think I've basically identified 5 broad areas that I think a number of these discussions can then fit in. Firstly, is that government must recognize that education is a key tool to bring about education transformation and transformation of society. Secondly, that government must have an interest in education and teachers. So in terms of how they structure their policies and all of that, this is what they must take into account. Thirdly, that government must work with teachers, their unions and teaching councils to professionalize the profession and make sure that teachers, when we talk about knowledge creation, teachers are part of this knowledge creation. Fourthly, governments must recognize and appreciate teachers. So issues around teacher autonomy, self-reflection will fall under that category. And finally, governments must advocate for and promote teaching as a career of choice and ensuring that we recruit young minds into the teaching profession. So I think we can build consensus around these issues, make sure that at the summit we have a commitment from heads of state, but as part of post-summit activities, make sure that we've got mechanisms to monitor and hold governments accountable on their achievements. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and I wish you a great conference, and see you next time. Bye-bye.